Hello, everyone. Welcome to this webinar, Beyond the Walls, where we'll be discussing the needs that arise for families where the child has palliative care needs in their time outside of the hospital. We have got over 230 registrations today, and those are coming from every state and territory in Australia, as well as New Zealand, Dubai, Asia, and America. So welcome to everyone who's joined in today, and thank you for making time for this. Before we get started in the content of today, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands where we're coming from today. I'm in Brisbane, and up here the traditional owners are the Turrbal and the Yagara people. So I'd like to acknowledge their connection to the land and acknowledge that that there's always been, they've always connected and come together as communities, and hopefully that we'll be continuing on a bit of that and talking about how that can work well today. I'm Melanie Rolfe. I can't remember if I've already said that. I'm Melanie Rolfe. I work for Palliative Care Australia, and I've worked sort of around the sector for about 15 years, a lot in community services, so I'm totally biased, and I'm owning that so I can just be biased. I've seen a lot of wonderful things happen when communities come together. Yeah, and I'm really excited that the guests that we've got with us today will be sharing their insights into how they've seen that work and how they think that could work better. I've been working for Palliative Care Australia on the Paediatric National Action Plan project, which is still underway, and the National Action Plan is coming out shortly in the first half of next year. And as part of that, I've done a lot of consultations with professional stakeholders and consumers. So I'll be bringing in some insights that we've heard through that today, but really today is about the wonderful panel that we've got to share their experiences. One thing that I want to touch on just briefly, because we might have people here from different backgrounds, is that paediatric palliative care is quite different to an adult model. Paediatric palliative care can start in utero, and it can continue on until that young person transitions to adult services. So it's a really lifelong, holistic care of the person and their family. And a quote and a sentiment that we heard a lot in the National Action Plan consultations is that paediatric palliative care isn't about death and dying, it's about life and living. And yeah, we've got a lot of wonderful examples to hear today about how people have linked in with those services that help them live their best life. I'd like to acknowledge that you know, this is a heavy topic, and it might be heavy emotion. So if it feels like, for any of our viewers, if it feels like too much and you need a moment, then please listen to yourself and go gently with yourself. And on that note, so today we're going to be focusing on three sort of topic areas. We've decided on these because it's sort of the areas that are quite easy to miss, especially when you're looking through the lens of the hospital and just what you see in that context, rather than the family holistically and their lives that exist beyond the hospital walls. So we'll be talking about the value of community services. We'll be talking about sibling needs, and we'll be talking about transition to adult services. And there's opportunity to ask some questions at the end. So if you have any questions, then please pop them into the chat. But without further ado, I would love for you guys to get to know a bit about the panel that we've got here today. So I would like to invite the panelists to introduce themselves and a bit about themselves and what's brought them to the paediatric palliative care sector and their experience that they'll be sharing today. Mikaela, did you want to kick us off from that?
Thank you. So I'm Mikaela Norris. I'm 21 years old, and when I was 10 months old, I was diagnosed with spinal muscular atrophy, which is how I got into the paediatric service system.
Thanks, Mikaela. Noelyne, would you like to share a bit about your story and why you're here today?
Okay. Yeah, Noelyne Davis, hello. I've been married to Alan for almost 43 years. I've got 5 children, grandchildren of 4, and 3 little foster children at the moment. Our youngest daughter, Lily, is the one that brought us into the system. She's 17 and she suffered a brain injury at birth and has cerebral palsy. She's got quadriplegia and she's non-verbal and fed via a tube, peg tube. Lily was referred to the paediatric palliative care team in 2011, about the time of her 6th birthday, when she became really sick. She had a collapsed lung. The palliative care team have walked alongside us during many admissions to the hospital, and have always been there at the end of the phone, either at home or in the hospital, and come to visit too. We returned back to Australia in 2010 after living in the UK for 10 years, where we'd accessed the local hospital for extra help due to Lily's life-limiting condition, often using the Children's Hospice as a family for short breaks. In 2018, due to Lily's frequent admissions to the Children's Hospital, I applied to become part of the Family Advisory Committee, which I'm still on. And in 1995, unfortunately, we lost our son Cameron in a drowning incident. And so we wish we'd have had the help of the palliative care team then, because we didn't even know we could bring Cameron home. That's a bit of our story.
Kelly, did you want to go next to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. Hi everyone, my name's Kelly Oldham. I work as a children's nurse practitioner and one of the clinical leads at Hummingbird House Children's Hospice here in Queensland. And Hummingbird House is Queensland's only children's hospice, and we're a statewide service. And I've been working in children's hospices for about 18 years now. That's both over in the UK and here at Hummingbird House. I love all areas of the work, but I would say I have a special interest in antenatal and perinatal palliative care, and I'm currently the chair of a statewide working group called PAN-PC, which stands for Perinatal, Antenatal and Neonatal Palliative Care. But pleasure to be here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. And Tim.
Yeah, good day, everyone. So I'm Tim Rogers, and my official title is National Collaborations and Advocacy Manager at Redkite, but fundamentally I'm a social worker. I've been a social worker for a long time and have worked in the cancer space since 1994, but started my career in community development and have, like Mel, have a complete bias towards the importance of what happens in the community. And so I'm really keen to be here and talk about those topics today. But yeah, my area of greatest knowledge is in children's cancer and adolescent cancer, which of course includes palliative care from that perspective. But I'll acknowledge to you that I bring a perspective that is largely involved with the cancer space. In my early years, I did adult palliative care as well and have a broad understanding of that, including some personal involvement with it too.
Thank you so much, everyone. And yeah, I look forward to hearing more bits about your story as we go on through the sort of different topics. I'm gonna start us off with a little video that Canteen have allowed us to share. Which is a mum talking about her son's experience of sort of having community and friend support around him.
I also worried a little bit about the social aspect of it for him. There were friends who really disappointed. I was disappointed for him. And they kind of checked in a bit at the beginning and then got a bit old and didn't check in for months and went traveling, and I found that difficult to understand with the different forms of media that you have. There's so many different forms, and Facebooks and Twitters, and that, you know. So I was sort of, and I don't know if I did him any good or not, trying to prepare him, telling him a story about somebody who said that their friends, their circle of friends had changed at the end of their treatment. There were ones that were on the outskirts that proved to be the ones that were now stepped up, and there were ones that were really close and that had just basically abandoned them. And that this happens for, sometimes people don't understand. I said they don't often, they just can't go there. They feel uncomfortable, they're afraid, they don't know what to say to you. And so don't take it personally. It's a reflection of that often they're just not, it's such a kind of traumatic life event. They can't cope with it. So I was trying to sort of prepare him not to take away some of the hurt of friends abandoning.
Mix and match airlines to create the best value return airfare at Webjet.
Sorry for the ad. Yes, so there we go. Yeah, so that's unfortunately was that sort of theme of friends not being there, people crossing, just not knowing what to say, was something that we definitely heard a lot in the National Action Plan consultations. Noelyne, did you want to talk to any experiences that you've had around that?
Yeah, I can do, yeah. Alan and I, we love to talk about Cameron, and we returned to the UK in 1998, which was actually 3 years after we'd lost Cameron. Alan's parents lived quite local to us and used to visit, and that you could tell the moment that we started to talk, or it looked like we were going to talk about Cameron, they would become uncomfortable and leave, make their excuses to leave. But we had actually lost their friends had lost 2 sons just the year before we lost Cameron. And I remember feeling exactly the same. When we were out with them one night, they were starting to talk about their boys, and it made me feel very uncomfortable, and I didn't want them to cry. So we'd experienced that. And I actually went back and apologised to them later on.
That sounds really tough. Do you think there's anything that can be done, or have you seen it done well, where people have built a community around them?
Yeah, I was explaining, there was a family that we've met along our journey. In fact, their daughter's since passed, but what they did for their daughter Mina was they actually moved to an area where it was very accessible for her, local shops, etc. And they went around and they made sure those people and shopkeepers would know who she was, so that they could say good morning to her and, you know, just give her a social life outside. She was an adult by this time. She was, I think, probably about 17, 18, similar age to Lily. Anyway, they also put in the local newspaper that they would like people to come in and read for Mina, because she loved to hear people reading. And they also started up a evening meal at her home. They managed to actually give her a part of their home that was private for Mina, and people would come in. They would be on a roster, and they may only come once a year, but they just felt it was nice that somebody could come in and talk to Mina and tell them about their day and what they've been doing, just to give her a lot, you know, a bit of different from just the mundane stuff. So that's where we met them with Lily. But when Mina passed, of course, lots of those people would really become very good friends and were happy to talk about Mina and laugh and still share, which are the things that I think we said we missed from Cameron, where people didn't want to talk about it. Our friends moved away and they, wouldn't share in those little things that we wanted to talk about of Cameron.
That sounds like that family, it sounds like they put a lot of effort into sort of building that up around them, and then also had that, I guess, people around them that were receptive to stepping into those roles, which is good to have. Yeah. I know Kelly and Tim, you guys have a lot of, you would have seen across your careers a lot of times where community can sort of help. How sort of structurally, what are the ways that the organisations around those people can help to set that up so that it's not so much of a burden on the person that's going through it themselves to be so proactive, like that example with Mina and her family? Is there ways that organisations can step in and help with that? Kelly, did you want to kick us off?
Yeah, I was just reflecting as Noelyne was speaking around really that theme of isolation. It's so prominent, and we hear that from families all of the time. So, you know, isolation when families are caring for a child with a life-limiting condition, and parents really have little time to maintain relationships, and you know, they're being a parent but also a full-time carer, and those care needs are really often very high. So that we hear from parents and families how isolating that can be. And then I guess that was really lovely, Noelyne, to share those stories about Mina. And I guess that kind of echoes a lot of the work and the foundations that we're working on at Hummingbird House and keen to develop at the moment, because what we realise in the work that we do and what's emerging from the research is death and dying is really quite taboo in our Western society, and we're quite a death-averse culture. So I think we kind of approach this work from a community lens, and we do a lot of education and support in the community, but really looking to partner with communities. And we find really listening and getting to know communities and families and how they function. There's often quite a lot of inner resilience and resource, and that's what I was hearing listening to Noelyne. So we do not feel that we go into communities and tell communities how it should be done or lead that. It's all about partnering with communities and listening and learning from communities. And through that partnership, I think that's where that key development and support in inner resilience and resources is really built. So that's kind of the approach and lens that we take. Don't know about yourself, Tim.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, that's fantastic. It's just great to hear when things are being done in the community. And I think the key thing is, of course, that families and communities, or families and their communities, they're 24/7, really, aren't they? They're the at your fingertips resource, whereas the various professional services that come in, it's a more limited thing. So enabling that community connection is just a critical point. And I think, given you're asking sort of how can organisations do that, I guess I'll point to the way Redkite has been approaching it, which is multifaceted, I suppose, is recognising there are different components of community. So there's the family themselves, and obviously we do lots of one-to-one work with families and helping them sort through and find solutions to the blocks with their community, enabling them to sort of activate that support that may be available to them. But I think for organisations, it's really important to open up the capacity to support the community as well. So Redkite certainly offers its support to families' support networks. We're really careful to make sure that that's not in any way sort of taking the power away from families. Families need to be in charge of what's happening to them, but we provide resources and information about how support networks can work better for families. So I think there's that aspect of community as well. We've got some resources that are online that are available for families and for friends to sort of tap into what's going on, because the taboos are huge and our avoidance of death is huge. And while there are, there's Dying to Know Day and various other things to try and build knowledge in small local communities, a lot of those taboos still sit there because people haven't had a direct experience themselves. So we've got resources online, as do other organisations. And look, I'll flag an extra thing as well. This year we've started up an app which is called Kite Crew. Now, that's specifically for cancer, paediatric cancer, but the Gather Crew group and Gather My Crew, that app is available for other people as well. And it's an app which is aimed at enabling people's support networks to be more active, to stay connected, take direction from the family, not to take over, but so there's sort of some app-based things that can help enabling the family to access their networks better and equipping the networks to be able to be available to do more work. So it takes a few different approaches, I think.
Is that around sort of like where the family can say specific things that they need, and then people will put their hand up to say, I'll deliver dinner on Tuesday night, or that sort of thing, those sort of practical?
Yeah, it's whatever kind of support they need. But yes, it's a kind of thing where you can put tasks out, but it's well structured so that there are layers to that. So tasks may only be visible to particular people. Obviously, for example, we know that people are very careful around who they might entrust childcare to or whatever. So there's that. But also, I think really importantly, families can have a friend as sort of their administrator, someone, so they're not having to manage all that, because we know that families are often overwhelmed. There's so much to do, but if they have a trusted friend, but like all things, it's best sort of get it set up early. Don't leave things until the end. I think with palliative care, we still have this issue about, sort of the end stages of palliative care, and that often a lot of the support and a lot of the offers come along far too late, rather than setting up a whole community around supporting a family throughout the experience, from diagnosis or realization onwards, I guess.
Yeah. I think having that direction, that can be something that sort of bridges that gap of people not knowing what to say, so they just leave, or they cross the road, or they don't want to say anything. And Kelly, I know you've got a beautiful example from Hummingbird House of sort of a community coming together and maybe having a bit of that focal point around how the community can support after a child's died. Did you want to share a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. And I think just to say before I share the photographs, you know, what we find working with families and working with families in the end of life, and another part of our service is what we call after death care, participatory after death care. And families, we find, are often quite unaware of what options are available to them and what choices they have when caring for their child at this end of life and after death care space. And through sort of gentle invitation and knowledge and sharing, we find that communities, again, are really quite resourceful. They often step into that space, that community space of realizing that they can look after their own as a community when their child's dying, and they can actually do a lot of this themselves, like we used to many years ago. So if I just share my screen, I can share with you some examples, a few photographs here of what, could you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah, so just what community hospice, I guess, looks like out of a hospital setting. So this is our hospice building in Chermside in Brisbane, just in the southeast corner of Queensland. So these are some of our outdoor spaces that we utilise for short break stays or end of life care and memory making. So really a connection to the outdoor spaces and community, even in the hospice building. But as a statewide service, oh, I can't just change my photograph there in a sec. Okay, so this photograph is a good example of a family stepping into that after death care space. So this family were extremely resourceful. They came to the hospice for end of life care and soon realised with just some gentle openings and invitations that they could do this themselves. So you can see there, they went off to the local shop and they bought their own spray paints just to get the right shade of colour blue for their little boy. And really, it was a community-led funeral service. This is in the backyard of Hummingbird House, but this can happen in any backyard. And this also is another example of a community response to funeral or celebration of life. Again, this is in the Hummingbird House backyard, but could take place and has taken place in parks, in own family backyards. And we did very little. We facilitated and held the family and held the space. And this was a community response to a celebration of life. And you can see the community really coming together here to celebrate this young man's life with their family. And they had their funeral at sunset. So, you know, just by talking and sharing conversation and options within communities and families, our experiences, families really can step into this space and be very resourceful. But it really is about changing the language and talking more about death and dying and building death literacy within communities.
Yeah. Do you, sorry, my daughter's bang shut. Do you have any comment around sort of the trajectory sort of after the funeral and how community can step in there?
Yeah, look, and I guess we also, we hear stories from families similar to what Noelyne was saying around losing friendships and friendships changing, and families also reflect on them changing themselves, which is totally understandable, and not having the same life as they had when their child was alive. I think, you know, what we see when families are involved and communities are involved in this stage, when there's an invitation to actually be alongside the child, a bit like what Noelyne was saying with Mina's story, the family, you know, had that connection to the community during the child's illness. There's often a much more natural transition to then support within grief and bereavement. But we find, you know, for teenagers when we engage schools in the early days, and they can be more involved and we can do education in that space. There's often more of a community holding, I guess, for that family into bereavement, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Mick, I know we haven't heard much from you yet, but I'm keen to hear from you sort of, you know, what having a community around you was looked like, or, you know, what sort of services have been able to help you, with the community and linking in with people kind of aspect of it.
Sure. When I was quite young, I was always in and out of hospital, and linking in with the community was so important, not just for me, but for my sister, for my parents. It was very vital. And when I was about 2 or 3 years old, I was lucky enough to make a wish, and I got to have a cubby house built in my parents' backyard. That's what I wished for. And that really brought the whole community together, which meant so much to me and my family. Having that support really makes a difference to the mental health of, I think, of the family. But yeah, I don't have much more to say on that, sorry.
Yeah, no, those are beautiful examples, and I think that highlights really nicely. I think in a clinical context where the focus might be, you know, like a hospital context where the focus might be like symptoms and that sort of thing, sometimes joy can be underrated as, you know, for how beneficial it is for the whole family and for the mental health, like you say.
Yes.
Yeah, yes. That's a really important component of it. Were there services that your sister linked in with?
Yeah, so my sister was lucky enough to go on a camp that linked in with other siblings that had, you know, brothers and sisters that were unwell, so she could connect with people that were going through the same kind of thing. And I don't know, I think it helped her cope a little bit. Yeah, it's not easy seeing your sister sick all the time, and being able to speak to somebody else who's around the same age, who's going through something similar, definitely made a difference for my sister.
Yeah, that peer support, I think, is often something that I hear that families value, someone being able to actually understand what you're going through firsthand. I've got a little video that I want to share with you that's sort of touching on that sibling component. It's a young man whose little sister passed away from cancer. And yeah, he shares his story about what that was like for him and sort of the emotional processing of it. So I'll share that, and we can sort of segue into that conversation around the sibling needs.
Communicating about my grieving stage with my little sister has always been something that I have not wanted to do. I've not wanted to, especially with my mum. Like at canteen, we have discussion groups where we can openly talk about these things. But I don't know, I really wish I knew what it was stopping me from talking to my mum. I'd rather her have the help, and like, maybe communicating with me is what she needs for that help, but it's just, I don't want to make myself look vulnerable to talking about my emotion. And I guess it comes back to the whole identity of being a man. And but yeah, I don't want to put myself in that vulnerable state of her thinking that I need help when she's probably the one that needs it more than me. And I'm always trying to put her before me, but again, it comes back to the communication and me struggling to communicate with her, and it's just constant barrier after barrier of things that arise. So yeah, it can be quite hard.
Sort of saying that he's quite actively been sort of hiding his emotions from his mum because of concern for her and her needs, and not wanting to put her through, you know, needing to support him when she was struggling. Noelyne, I know that you sort of you know, you've had the experience of Cameron dying, and you've got all your other children as well. Did you have any comment on the sort of the sibling grief component that we're touching on there?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, that's right. Cameron was on life support for 5 days, and it was agreed that we'd turn Cameron's life support off. And on that day, we actually turned the night before, we had people over to say goodbye to Cameron, neighbours and things. And our son just took a box of tissues around and to everybody. And on the morning when we decided to turn the machine off, Alex decided not to come in. He chose not to be with us. But with the sibling side of it, later years, sorry, can I just go back? On the day, Alex was the one that was home, and he'd actually been in our pool with his friend. So then I found Cameron in the pool, the commotion of everything. Alan arrived back home as the ambulance was going, so he went with the ambulance. I jumped in the car, we left. There was no thought to where Alex was or what was to happen to Alex. We just went to the hospital, early hours, he was transferred over, and Alex was looked after, we now know, by a neighbour. But he always seemed to be okay and got on with it. But so then the children, my older daughter was away that night. She was, Alex was 8, Adele was 10, Adele was at camp. And years later, Adele explained that she felt guilty that she had been at camp, because if she hadn't gone to camp, Cameron wouldn't have fell in the pool because he followed her around everywhere. Then when Alex was about 16, he was having a bit of trouble with school and everything. And anyway, as it expired, Alex needed to see a counsellor. So we took him to see a counsellor. And for me, it was actually a Queenslander. We were over in the UK at this time, but he was a Queenslander. And I thought, oh, he's going to understand a bit about maybe Cameron and the swimming pool incidents and things. Anyway, so Alex saw the counsellor, and then at the end of this, how many weeks, it was agreed, Alex had agreed that he could talk to us as Alex's parents and explain what Alex was feeling. And what had happened is, to start this off, Alex had actually, we'd found him breathing in butane gas, and we didn't know why. We thought he was trying to kill himself. But it turned out that what had happened is he was seeing flashbacks of when he was 8 years old of that day. And at 16, he couldn't quite, it was all just in his head, and he wanted to get rid of it. So after talking to the counsellor, he also felt that his dad was quite short with him. He never really got on well with Alan. He always felt that he didn't. And he said that my dad doesn't like me because I killed Cameron. For me and his dad, that was really difficult to deal with. Alan built the bridges, and yeah, so really we didn't even think Alex, he seemed to be very well all over those years, got on with school, and that was it. So yeah, we do forget about our children. And yeah, he believed it was his fault. My daughter thought it was her fault. And I guess Alan and I both, Alan threw his golf clubs away because he'd been at golf that day. He threw his golf clubs out because it was his fault. And obviously I was the one at home. So I deal with that. But yeah, and another thing that people do is they always ask your children, how's your mum? They do forget the children. That was our experience.
Yeah, wow. I think that that highlights so clearly that you know, siblings who are young, when they go through something terrible, you know, they grow up, and I think sometimes there's an assumption that their understanding will then be of a 16-year-old looking back at it. But when someone's gone through something traumatic, it's often that emotion is sort of locked in them at that stage where they were then. And like, even though they might be able to logically look at something differently, the guilt or the emotion might still sit there. And it's a decades-long process. And as kids grow older, they're gonna need different things at different stages. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that, Noelyne.
I would like to just speak on the video. For me and my family, we've always been very tight-knit, though when I was unwell, there were opportunities that my sister had to miss out on, unfortunately, and that was because my parents were so occupied worrying about me, making sure they got to the hospital okay, making sure they got clothes there. But now, if, you know, there's anything that my sister's feeling or if something I'm feeling, we do try and communicate that to each other, and try and lessen that vulnerability like in the video. But it is very valid what he's going through.
Was there anything that sort of helped you make that switch to being able to communicate more with your sister, do you think?
It took a long time. You know, we were living together and we were always arguing because we saw so much of each other. But I think now that I've been able to move out and been able to have some space from her, I've noticed that the bond is a lot tighter, and I feel a lot closer to her than I've ever felt in my life. As well, I think the sibling camps and, you know, those services definitely would have been a factor in helping out her mental state as well.
Noelyne, you've got your hand up there. Did you want to?
Yeah, just a quick thing. I just sort of was wondering, really, like, because ours was a sudden death.
Yeah.
There was no time to talk, or we were all trying to deal with that day. So there's no good or bad, but with Lily, I hope that we will handle that a lot different. Obviously, Lily's life limiting, and we are able to talk. Okay, maybe not, Lily's not verbal, but we can discuss and think about things that we'd like at the end, and maybe it doesn't take away any of the pain, but hopefully it'll be different.
Yeah. And is that something that that Lily's siblings are involved in as well, those conversations? And
yes, because I think I spoke to you before, and I was saying that palliative care, we're with the Compassionate Friends, and they put out a magazine, and my Adele, who's now 38, I said to her, oh, there's a story in there of a young lady, and it was a very similar time to us as well. That's why I've often looked at this little boy's name and his sister's, and there was a similar age gap. And the girl had written about her experience about how she used to maybe lock the little brother out of the room and things like that. And I said to Adele, I think you might find something from this if you read it, and that lady's available if you wanted to talk. And Adele only read the first couple of lines and she pushed it aside. So it's interesting to see even now that there's still stuff that
and having that prompt might have been sort of a bit of an opening to thinking.
So even though we think we're doing it better, there's still stuff that we haven't maybe finished with Cameron, and we're hopefully with Lily we do talk a lot more, and we think about what we would like at the end and what would be good for Lily. And
and I mean there's not going to be anything that's going to make it not hurt, you know, but those conversations are important. Mikaela, did you have something?
So I forgot to mention, I know that I spoke a little bit about me and my sister arguing all the time. I did forget to mention how some of those arguments did involve her going like, well, because mum and dad are always, you know, focused on you, this and that, and it would kind of get blamed on me. That's kind of all I wanted to really add. That's something that I forgot.
Yeah, right. So there was the blame and the conversation, and that. What keeps striking me is, you know, when you're talking about your sister, like I'm thinking about me and my brothers. You know, like so much of this is very usual. You know, like, oh, we're in each other's space all the time, so we're always fighting. Like that's, you know, it's just such usual sibling stuff, and I think. That's an important sort of factor to consider, I guess, if you're talking about, you know, hospital staff and how they can support whole families. So we might, while we've got sort of the Noelyne and Mikaela sort of going back and forth about some of their experiences, we might just roll on with that. Now, we've Well, you guys have both got quite a unique experience in that Mikaela, you're now a young adult, and Noelyne, Lily's just at the cusp of young adulthood. I'm really keen to hear from you guys what the process of sort of transitioning from paediatric to adult services has been like, and any learnings that we can take from that. Like, how can we do it better, or what happened that was really they could take on to help people in that transition.
Yeah. I personally found the transition quite rough. Personally, because I met my doctor very quickly at the adults. There wasn't really much much more communication with the doctors at like my old service, and I felt like the doctor at the adults didn't really take the time to communicate and get to know me like my other doctors do. It was very quick. It was just kind of like, here you go, you're there now. But I think it would have been a lot better if at the time my old doctors and my new doctors had communicated a little bit, or even had some mediations with me, just to ease the transition, because it's a whole new world in the adults, you know. So yeah, I think that's something that I could hopefully give to the audience to learn from that.
Yeah, some three-way communication with the peds team, the adults team, and you, so that everyone knows what information's been passed on, and a bit more about what that process is going to be like.
For sure.
Noelyne, did you have any comments on that you're sort of between worlds at the moment, I think. Is that
interesting to hear Mikaela's story, because I just thought it might be just us, and because we're regional now, we've relocated to regional Queensland in 2019, and so we left the main metropolitan tertiary hospital behind. Obviously we travel down to see our specialists, but yes, it's been a really different story up here, because Lily literally went to surgery from the paediatric ward one morning, and I was told to take all my stuff and Lily's stuff with me, because she'll be going back to the adults ward, which we did. And as Mikaela said, we're not consulted. They saw Lily as an adult in the hospital, so they were trying to even give her some medication that I didn't even know what it was. I questioned that, and to the point of I had to ask to see the doctor. I was accused of saying I wanted to withhold medications, and I was saying, but I haven't actually said that you can give them. So yeah, it's been a very rocky road to transition into that. Luckily for us, we found out that because Lily's when she finishes year 12 is actually when the big transition will happen. So we have actually got 2 more years now to work hard on leaving our paediatric services behind. But yes, it's definitely been a rocky road and a scary one.
We've heard that a lot. We've heard that a lot in the National Action Plan. We only had a few consumers who had that experience of the transition, but no one had good stories about it. I think it's a real area of need for a bit more support, and a few more steps in between just the end of one service and the beginning of the next one, kind of thing.
The Family Advisory Committee in Brisbane, so hopefully we're on a committee for that.
Yeah. Kelly and Tim, did you guys have any comment on that sort of transition process?
Yeah, it's such an unknown space for our families. We hear lots of different experiences, and I think things have developed in areas. There are transition teams and nurse navigators, but I don't think anything can really prepare for that change from paediatric services into adult services. And I think for the young people that we work with, they have extremely complex needs, sort of very high complex needs, and have been really closely cared for by their paediatric services, and often the paediatric PAL care team is very much involved, and that means there is a 24/7 1-800 number where families can reach out all of the time. So we try from a PAL care perspective to gradually transition out of the hospice and the PAL care system as slow as we can, but some of the other sort of changes into adult can be very sudden. I think it's wonderful that Mikaela is able to share her experiences, and we've known Mikaela at Hummingbird House for many years, and I know how important it is for Mick to be able to be an advocate for other young people who are not able to, verbally express that experience and what they have to go through. So I think voice and conversation from people who are living the experience, like Noelyne on behalf of Lily and Mikaela, is so important to make those changes. Yeah, but lots of work, so much work to be done. In this space, it's a really challenging and complex space, and families, really, it's a frightening time, isn't it? Yeah.
Tim, did you want to say anything on that space around the transition?
Just acknowledging what's been said, I guess obviously it is a huge challenge. Don't need to go into that. Probably just a comment around the benefit. Then again, I'll just underline of people's own networks and community, because while the stuff changes in the hospital, potentially the network is still there, and I guess is hopefully a stable base to move from. That doesn't solve the issues of transition into adult systems, but I think again it just underlines systems. Like those of us who are here as professionals, we work in systems, and our capacity to support people is limited by that, and it underlines the importance both of listening so carefully, and my gosh, Noelyne and Mikaela, you've shared so much important stuff. So for us as professionals, if they come in, if people transition into or out of our service, listening to them, hearing them, helping with that transition. But again, I would underline that what happens in people, if people's other networks can remain stable, that's a base from which to deal with this big change, So again, there's a real place for community there.
We've got a few questions coming in. I think we've got time for maybe one or two. So I'll ask this one from Nikki. This one is she'd love to ask Noelyne and Mikaela how they think that something like the app that Tim was talking about might work for them in activating and organising their communities. So that was the app where you can sort of put up, have a group of people who you nominate a part of that team, and you can sort of put a shout out for what you need.
Yeah, and I guess I'd just also flag about the app. It's also a communication tool because it helps to structure communications as well. But yeah, be interested to hear.
Mikaela and Noelyne, did you have any comments on how, do you think that's the sort of thing that might work for you? Noelyne?
I think we really try and pull together as a family. I don't know if we would put something up that, I don't know that it would work for us.
Yeah, I think I haven't really accessed an app like that before, so I wouldn't know exactly where to start, but it does sound like it would really help in activating the communities. I'm not sure what else to say about that.
I've got another question here. What's a common misconception about paediatric palliative care, or what's one thing that you wish that your community knew about paediatric palliative care?
I think that paediatric palliative care, I think we spoke about this earlier, but it's around death a lot. It's not really just it's not anything about the lives of the children, and I think that's way more important. I think that's a big misconception. It's not all about death. I mean, I was able to get respite through Hummingbird House, though that is a hospice. like that wasn't death, that was me making memories with my family and my sister, and my friends as well. Yeah.
Making memories component. Noelyne, did you want to answer that one at all?
Yeah, again, it's the support, not real. When we were the evening that they came and talked to us and said Lily needed to go over to the paediatric palliative care team, that was pretty scary. And I remember having that conversation with the nurse there then. And in the end, after many hours of her talking to me and us agreeing, I asked her about what happens if Lily gets to 18, because remember she was only just coming up to 6. And she said, well, some children graduate. And that for me was fine. That meant I could come over because Lily would graduate. Or we hoped she would. I didn't want to come over thinking, well, if I accepted palliative care, that meant she was going to die. Which I think in adult world, that's what we think. We accept palliative care and that means they're going to die. Where this wasn't, and it hasn't been. It's been a case of exactly like Mikaela said, making great memories, lots of lovely things to think about. Yeah, and the support.
I've got a question for probably, I guess it's for everyone, but around sort of hospital services and how, if they know that people are going to leave the hospital and go out into the community and have these needs out there that they might not know about or they might not have thought about, how can they prepare families for that, for leaving the hospital environment? Tim, you've unmuted.
Yeah. By knowing that is almost definitely going to happen, and recognizing that the hospital is absolutely part of the community. I don't like too big a separation of the two, but the reality is that hospital services focus in the hospital, and there are community supports and services out there. And I think the hospital have such a crucial role in enabling those pathways so that families get connected to the right supports that are in the community, and that they're endorsed and encouraged, and that those are really warm referrals. Because what we do here all too often is that families, feel pretty well connected to their community, to their hospital supports. And then the language that Redkite hears when we've surveyed around this is isolated and abandoned when they leave. And that's not the intention of hospital staff. I absolutely know that's not the intention. So I think really proactively working towards that transition, enabling it, etc., is the best thing the hospitals can do, rather than just focusing on what they're delivering to families and then sort of allowing them on out into the community. So making sure there's continuity.
Yeah. I would, sorry, Mel. I was just going to say, I would echo that and say, refer to the paediatric healthcare service. That is a statewide service, so based into the hospital, but also is statewide, and they are amazing at connecting in community. They'll also refer on to the hospice as well. But together they know the regions, they know the areas, they provide that 24/7 support. They go out into the communities, in the regions, into the rural areas. There's lots of amazing projects going on in that education space. There's a lot of work going on in the community from the hospital. The nurse navigators have been fantastic in bridging that gap between hospital and community. So I would say making sure that the right teams are involved, that you're making the referrals as professionals, and if there's a palliative care team, then refer to your palliative care team, get to know your local hospice.
Yeah,
thanks.
I agree. Sorry, I agree with Kelly and Noelyne, and Tim. I think that it's important if the hospital refers you to paediatric systems to guide you there. I know we weren't really referred that much, which isn't that great, but I think it would make a big difference if the hospitals would refer you to those communities and those services that are needed.
And I love the concept of that warm referral that Tim, I love that phrase, the warm referral, around really making sure the referral is not just, this exists, I've written you a letter, you can go there, but really making sure that family understands exactly what they can access from that service and are connected with you know, connected with the people there, and they've started to make those relationships. Noelyne, did you want to say something on that?
Just a quick thing, yeah, just to say that the hospice, you know, we've now moved regional, like we say. We still access the short breaks and things like that if we come down to Brisbane, or we need you know, a stay while we're at hospital for appointments or something. But also a team have been coming up over the last few months to help set up a group locally for us to find our supports in the community and who might need some support. So we've been trying to arrange an event, but the rain got us, so it was flooded out, but that will happen. And yeah, so there's not just the metropolitan centres and around the hospice, they come out and they visit us, and not just when we need them because Lily's sick. We're trying to set up support groups up here too.
Yeah,
no, Noelyne, that's a real partnership. You're kind of not singing your own praises enough there. Noelyne is really proactive in that space and gathering the community together. We provide some partnership, but really the assets and the movement is in the community, and Noelyne's been really key and wonderful and resourceful in that space.
Thanks, Kelly.
I'm mindful that we're coming to an end. We've got a few other questions that have come through, and a lot of thank yous very much for everyone for sharing their stories, especially to Mikaela and Noelyne. And yeah, just to wrap us up, I'm just going to ask each of our panelists to share with us either a service that's really helped them, or for our professional panel members, maybe something about their service that people might not know about, and just one take-home message. If people were leaving today with just remembering one thing, what you would want that to be.
I would like to start off by thanking the Starlight Children's Foundation for everything that they did for me and my sister when we were little. Without them, I don't know if I would have been able to mentally cope with those hospital trips. And I think one thing to remember would be that, like, you know, I don't think hospitals really see the joy and kids play is so vital, but it really is for our mental health and for the child's mental health. So if you could take time to, if there's something that you could do, I don't know, like refer them to a community outside, or just just like
a bit of play in as well.
Yeah, and just acknowledge that you know, the mental health aspect of it, then yeah, that will be the start of a big change.
Yeah, that's really well put, Mikaela. Thank you. Tim, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. I'll name one thing that we haven't talked about. So on the Redkite website, you can tap into a resource called Walking Alongside, and that's a resource which is for professionals mainly, but who don't do a lot of work in the palliative care space, but find themselves doing work there. There's a video, there's a conversation starter resource, which is really about reflective learning. So, and it's a good resource for people who are doing some palliative care work where they haven't done it in the past or haven't done it so much, and great to get together with peers and to tap into. It's not just for families facing cancer. That's a free resource that anybody can download, and it was based in a very big project that was done by Lee Donovan and various others that had families' voices around their experience in bereavement as the dominant voice, and that led back to this resource for people working in palliative care that is quite useful. So I'll flag that as one that hasn't been mentioned. So Walking Alongside on the website, the Redkite website. And I'll just give a shout out to Mikaela. I think, Mikaela, you gave such a beautiful example of something that can only happen in community. You gave us that story about your cubby house and a community coming together. I've just got this image in my mind of a community coming together in a cubby house in your backyard. And yeah, if that doesn't say something about community and the power of that and enabling that, I don't know what does. So thank you for that story. That's going to stick in my mind for a while.
That's lovely.
Ellie, did you want to share with us?
Yeah, I will just share that we take referrals for children after they have died, so people often don't know that. So we may not meet a family and a child during their life, but you can refer to Hummingbird House for after death care, and we can meet the family during that stage. And I guess also to say that we accept referrals from the antenatal stage. So that's a real area of growth for us, antenatal and neonatal care, and that's all across the state. And I guess my take-home message would be to encourage professionals to really partner with families and work as a partnership rather than being the professional that might know best. And I think for me, the joy in this work is all the learnings that are shared from families. So if you just take the opportunity to pause and listen, you really can learn and shape your services in partnership with families.
Noelyne, did you want to share?
I have actually mentioned mine already. It was Compassionate Friends. Yeah. They are an organisation for bereaved parents. For us, they were our lifeline back then, all those years ago. We were paired up with a family of similar situation, but their little boy had died 10 years prior. So it was actually believable that they were still living and breathing. If they'd have been newer in their grief, I might have not thought they loved their boy as much as we did, but it was okay because they were 10 years on. So we still attend their candlelight service, which is actually this Sunday. That's around the world. They light the candles. So we still, even to this day, attend those if possible. So that's that. And my message would be, if you see something that reminds me of my son, tell me. If you're reminded of his birthday or that I'm missing my son, please tell me that you remember him. And when I speak his name or relive his memories, relive them with me and don't shrink away. If you never met my son, don't be afraid to ask about him. One of my greatest joys is to talk about him. And we're a long way down, but it still hurts.
Thank you so much for sharing Cameron's story and sharing your story and Lily's story with us today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. I feel like we've heard a lot about connection and joy and how, yeah, just little things like having those conversations, being willing to sit in those conversations with people is so meaningful. Yeah, and really at the end of the day, it's all about relationship and bringing communities together, bringing siblings together, bringing families together to make memories and to be able to share those memories after their child's gone. So thank you everyone for coming today. We've had so many thank you messages come through on the chat. I'll share that with the panelists afterwards. But thank you everyone who has come along today as well. This can be a hard space to sit in because it is sadness. It's not, you can't pretend that it's not. It's but that's why it's so important, because we're talking about real stuff that matters. So thank you everyone for being willing to have these conversations with us today. And for the people who are watching, if any of this has sort of been hard to hear, you know, if you've got the headspace, maybe take a moment and check in with yourself and sort of just approach that with curiosity and, you know, why would that be? And are there learnings from that for my practice, or are there learnings for, you know, that I could talk with colleagues about and that sort of thing? But we're running a tiny bit over, but I'll wrap us up there. But thank you everyone so much. Thank you to our fabulous panel for sharing all of your wisdom and insights. I'm really grateful that we got to have this conversation today. Thanks everyone.